The Great Hall of the Zentari Empire stood as a monument to their power, its crystalline walls reflecting the light of 1,000 conquered worlds. And today, those walls would witness a decision that would change everything. Ambassador Victor stepped forward, his scaled skin gleaming under the artificial lights as he activated the holographic display above the council table, a three-dimensional map of the galaxy that showed Zentari territory in brilliant purple, stretching across 47 star systems like a crown of conquest. Honored council members, Victor began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. I present to you our next expansion target, a region of space that has remained unclaimed for thousands of years. The hologram zoomed in on a section of space, marked with ancient warning symbols, faded and barely visible against the star field. And at the center of this region burned a yellow star with several planets orbiting it. Elder Council member Sora Keel raised one aged hand, her eyes narrowing as she studied the display with an expression that spoke of deep concern rather than excitement. That region is marked as restricted, she said quietly, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the other council members like a blade through silk. The old records specifically warn against entering that space. Victor's expression shifted to something between amusement and dismissal as he gestured at the faded symbols with a wave of his clawed hand. The records are over 3,000 years old, he countered, his tone suggesting that age alone made the warnings irrelevant. They were written by civilizations that no longer exist, primitive species that feared what they did not understand. Commander Vexnal rose from his seat, his military decorations catching the light as he moved to stand beside the holographic display. And his presence commanded attention in a way that made other council members sit straighter in their chairs. I have studied these so-called warnings, Vexnal announced, his voice filled with the certainty of a warrior who had won every battle he had ever fought. They are vague at best, superstitious nonsense at worst. He manipulated the hologram to display fragments of the ancient text, written in languages that required translation algorithms to decipher. And the words appeared in glowing script above the star map. Do not provoke the humans, one fragment read. And another stated, stay beyond their borders, while a third warned simply, they are not what they seem. Vexnal laughed, a sound that echoed off the crystalline walls like breaking glass. And several other council members joined him in his amusement. Humans, he said, drawing out the word as if it were a joke. A single species from a single world, and we are supposed to fear them? Sorakil stood, her movements slow but deliberate, and the room fell silent out of respect for her age and position, if nothing else. I have read the full records, she said, and her voice carried a weight that made even Vexnal pause in his confidence. Every civilization that encountered the humans and left records behind said the same thing. Avoid their space. Do not test them, and above all, do not assume you understand what you face. With respect. Elder, Victor interjected, his tone suggesting anything but respect. Those civilizations are gone, extinct or absorbed into other empires, while the Zentari have grown stronger with each passing century. He activated another display showing the military might of the Zentari fleet, massive warships armed with plasma cannons that could crack planets, shield technology that had never been breached in combat, and an army of warriors trained from birth to conquer and dominate. We have defeated every species we have encountered, Vikanel continued, his confidence growing with each word. We have superior technology, superior tactics, and superior warriors. What could one isolated species possibly do against the might of the Zentari Empire? Vexnal nodded in agreement, his hand resting on the holographic controls as he spoke to the assembled council with the authority of someone who had led fleets to victory. The region contains valuable resources, rare minerals, strategic positioning, and trade routes that would increase our wealth by 30%, he explained, his tactical mind clearly already planning the conquest. We would be fools to let ancient superstition prevent us from claiming what should be ours. The council members began to murmur among themselves, and Sorakil could see the decision forming before the vote was even called. They wanted the resources, they trusted their military power, and they were too proud to believe that warnings from extinct civilizations could be relevant to the mighty Xanthari. I move that we proceed with the expansion, Victor declared formally. And Dexenol seconded the motion with barely concealed eagerness. All in favor? The council speaker asked, and one by one the members raised their hands in agreement until only Sorakil remained with her hand lowered. The motion passes, the speaker announced. And just like that, the fate of the Xanthari fleet was sealed by arrogance and ambition. Sorakil sat down slowly, her expression sad rather than angry, because she had seen this pattern before in the histories of fallen empires: the refusal to heed warnings, the assumption of superiority, and the inevitable price of pride. I will lead the fleet personally, Dexenol announced, already planning his triumph. We will take 12 warships, more than enough to handle any resistance we might encounter. And what if the warnings were real? Sorakil asked quietly, but her voice was drowned out by the excited planning of the other council members. Within a week, the Xanthari fleet was assembled, 12 massive warships bristling with weapons, their hulls decorated with the symbols of conquest, and their crews confident in their inevitable victory. Thenil stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dread Sovereign, and gazed at the star charts showing their route into the restricted region, a journey that would take them past clearly marked boundary beacons warning all ships to turn back. Commander, his second officer asked, should we send a diplomatic message ahead of our arrival? Dexenol's laugh was cold and sharp as he shook his head in dismissal of such a suggestion. We do not ask permission from species we intend to conquer, he replied, his tone making it clear that diplomacy was for the weak. We take what we want, and if they resist, we crush them. The fleet engaged their faster-than-light drives, and the stars stretched into lines of light as they jumped toward the restricted zone, ignoring every warning beacon they passed, treating each one as nothing more than ancient decoration left behind by civilizations too primitive to matter on the Xanthari homeworld. Sorakil stood alone in the archive chamber, her aged hands touching the ancient records that told of humanity's first contact with the galactic community thousands of years ago. And she whispered a prayer for the fleet, not for their victory, but for their survival. The records told a story that the council had refused to hear, of a species that had clawed its way up from a deadly world, that had survived extinction events and ice ages and wars that would have destroyed lesser civilizations, and that had emerged not broken but hardened into something the galaxy had never seen before. But Dexenol and his fleet jumped through space toward Earth's region with confidence and arrogance, completely unaware that they were not heading toward conquest. They were heading toward a lesson that would be paid for in blood and broken ships. The warnings had been clear, but the Xanthari had chosen not to listen, and now they would discover exactly why those warnings had been written in the first place. The alarms began screaming across the human early warning station the moment the Xanthari fleet crossed into Earth's defensive perimeter, and Lieutenant Amy Foster watched her display light up with 12 massive contacts moving through space like they owned it. Unknown vessels detected, she announced into her comm system, her training keeping her voice calm even as her heart rate increased. Bearing 270 Mark 15. Estimated mass suggests capital ship class. The response came immediately from Earth Command. And Admiral Sarah. Kim's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 30 years preparing for exactly this moment. Dispatch the USS Valiant for intercept and communication, she ordered, already pulling up tactical displays and alerting the rest of the defense fleet. Captain Morrison, you are authorized to make first contact. Captain Gregg, Morrison acknowledged the order from his position on the bridge of the USS Valiant, a patrol vessel designed for exactly this kind of situation, fast, well-armed, and equipped with communication systems that could translate 43 known languages. "Helm, set intercept course," Greg commanded, his hands gripping the arms of his captain's chair as the ship's engines powered up to full communications. "Prepare the standard first contact package." The USS Valiant streaked through space toward the approaching alien fleet, and Greg took a moment to study the sensor data streaming across his display's 12 ships, each one larger than anything in Earth's current fleet. Powered by what appeared to be plasma-based propulsion systems, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Patterson sat at the tactical station, her fingers dancing across her controls as she analyzed the alien vessels with the practiced eye of someone who had studied every known weapon system in the galaxy. "Captain, their weapons configuration matches Tier 3 plasma technology," she reported, pulling up comparison data from humanity's extensive military database. "We encountered similar systems 40 years ago during the Kepler incident." Greg nodded, filing that information away as potentially useful, but hoping desperately that they wouldn't need it. First contact didn't have to end in violence if both sides chose to be reasonable. "Open all communication channels," he ordered, and the ship's artificial intelligence began broadcasting in every language and frequency humanity had ever cataloged. "Unknown vessels. This is Captain Greg Morrison of the United Earth ship Valiant." Greg's voice transmitted across space in multiple formats. "You have entered restricted space under human protection. Please state your intentions and purpose." The response came faster than expected, but the content made Greg's stomach sink with the weight of impending disaster. "Primitive vessel." A translated voice crackled through the speakers with barely concealed contempt. "You will vacate this region immediately. The Zentari Empire claims this space by right of superior power on the bridge of the Dread Sovereign." Commander Thexenol stared at the small human ship with something between amusement and irritation, like a lion might view an insect that dared to buzz near its meal. "A single ship?" his second officer asked in disbelief. "They send one ship to challenge our entire fleet?" Thexenol's laugh echoed across the bridge as he studied the tactical display showing the USS Valiant's position, and he couldn't help but feel vindicated in his decision to ignore the warnings. If this was the best humanity could muster, the conquest would be even easier than expected. Greg took a deep breath, knowing that his next words could determine whether this encounter ended in peace or war, and he chose them carefully. "Unknown fleet. You were warned about entering this region by the boundary beacons you passed," he said, keeping his tone professional and firm. "This space is under human jurisdiction. We request that you withdraw to neutral territory while we establish diplomatic communications." The response came in the form of a plasma blast that lanced across space and struck the USS Valiant's forward shields, causing the ship to shudder and alarms to blare across the bridge. "Shields holding at 85%, Lisa reported immediately, her hands already moving to target the ship that had fired. "Minor damage to forward array." Greg's jaw tightened as he realized that diplomacy had just failed in the most definitive way possible, and now he had to make a choice that would affect not just his ship, but potentially all of humanity's future. "Battle stations," he ordered, and the USS Valiant's crew moved with practiced efficiency to combat readiness. "All hands. This is the captain. We are under attack." He opened a direct channel to Earth Command, while simultaneously broadcasting to the Zentari fleet, and his voice carried both authority and one last desperate attempt at peace. "Unknown fleet. You have committed an act of war against humanity," Greg announced, making sure every word was recorded and transmitted. "I am authorized to respond with military force. Stand down immediately or face the consequences." Dexnol felt his anger rise at what he perceived as defiance from an inferior species. And he had spent too many years conquering to tolerate such insolence from anyone. "All ships, open fire," he commanded, his voice cutting across the fleet communication channels like a blade. "Destroy that pathetic vessel and show these humans what happens when they challenge the Zentari Empire." 12 massive warships opened fire simultaneously, and space lit up with plasma bolts and energy beams, converging on the small human patrol ship like a swarm of deadly insects. Greg's hands gripped his chair as the USS Valiant's shields flared under the assault, absorbing hit after hit while the ship's computer calculated trajectories and defensive patterns faster than any organic mind could process. "Evasive maneuvers," he ordered. And the helmsman sent the ship into a series of turns and rolls that would have killed an unprotected human crew from the G-forces alone. "Lisa, return fire, target their weapon systems only." The USS Valiant's main cannon spoke with precise bursts of energy, each shot calculated to disable rather than destroy, because Greg still hoped this could end without massive loss of life. One Synthari cruiser took a hit to its forward plasma cannon, the weapon exploding in a shower of sparks that sent the alien ship spinning out of formation. And Dexnol watched in shock as the small human vessel dodged and weaved through his fleet's combined firepower like it was dancing through raindrops. "How is that possible?" his weapons officer demanded, watching targeting computers struggle to lock onto the impossibly agile human ship. No vessel that size should be able to maneuver like that. Lisa's tactical display showed her something that made her heart race with both fear and excitement. The Zenthari were using brute force tactics, overwhelming firepower without precision, exactly like humanity had anticipated hostile aliens might fight. "Captain, their targeting systems are predictive rather than adaptive," she reported, already feeding that information to the ship's defensive AI. "They're shooting where we should be, not where we are." Greg allowed himself a small smile despite the situation, because humanity had spent decades developing combat doctrine based on the assumption that bigger didn't always mean better. "Continue evasive pattern Delta 7, he ordered. Then opened the channel to Earth Command again. "Admiral Kim, I need backup. The alien fleet has opened fire and shows no signs of stopping." Sarah Kim's response was calm and immediate, because she had been preparing for this exact scenario since the day she took command of Earth's defensive forces. "The Valiant's done its job," she said, watching tactical displays that showed the Zenthari fleet pursuing Greg's ship deeper into human space. "Now we show them what happens when they ignore our warnings across Earth's defensive perimeter." Stealth fields deactivated, and 12 human warships materialized from what the Zentari had thought was empty spaceships that had been hiding in plain sight, using technology the aliens couldn't detect. Waiting for exactly this moment, Admiral Kevin Hayes sat in the command chair of the USS Defender, watching the Zentari fleet realize too late that they had been led into a trap of their own making. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes," he broadcast to both his fleet and the alien vessels. "Zentari Commander, you are now surrounded by the Earth Defense Fleet power. Down your weapons and prepare to receive terms for your withdrawal." Dexnol stared at his tactical display in disbelief as 12 human warships appeared around his fleet like ghosts materializing from nightmares. And for the first time in his long military career, he felt something cold settle in his chest that might have been fear. But pride is a powerful thing, and arrogance even more so. And Dexnol had spent too long believing in Zentari superiority to accept the possibility that he might have made a catastrophic mistake. "They are bluffing," he announced to his bridge crew, trying to convince himself as much as them. "Engage all targets. Show these humans the true power of the Zentari Empire." The battle that followed would be remembered in both human and Zentari history, but for very different reasons. The space between Earth and the Centauri fleet exploded into chaos as plasma bolts and energy beams crossed the void in a deadly dance of light and destruction. But within the first 30 seconds of combat, Vexenal realized that something was terribly wrong. His tactical officer's voice came through with barely controlled panic as she reported what the sensors were showing. And every word made the commander's confidence crumble a little more. "Commander, the human ships are not where they should be," she announced, her claws clicking frantically across her console. "Our targeting computers cannot maintain locks. They move too fast, turn too sharply." Vexenal watched his main display as a human warship designated USS Defender pulled a maneuver that should have been physically impossible, spinning on its axis while maintaining forward momentum and firing precisely targeted shots that took out 3 of its fleet's missile batteries in rapid succession. "All ships, concentrate fire on single targets," he ordered, trying to impose order on a battle that was rapidly spiraling beyond his control. Overwhelm their shields with combined firepower. 3 Centauri cruisers turned their weapons on the USS Retribution, commanded by Captain Beth Reynolds, and unleashed enough plasma energy to vaporize a small moon, but the human ship's shields held with a technology that seemed to absorb and redirect the energy rather than simply blocking it. Beth's calm voice came through the tactical channel to the other human ships, coordinated and precise, like a surgeon making careful cuts. "Retribution targeting the lead cruiser's power distribution nodes," she reported, her weapons officer already firing before she finished speaking. "Mark targets Alpha 7 through Alpha 9 for supporting fire." 2 other human vessels, the USS Sentinel and USS Guardian, added their firepower to precise points on the Centauri cruiser's hull, and the alien ship's lights flickered as its main power systems failed under the surgical assault admiral. Kevin Hayes watched the battle unfold from the USS Defender's bridge with the calm of someone who had run this exact scenario 1,000 times in simulations, and reality was matching those simulations almost perfectly. "Helm, bring us about to bearing 090, he commanded, his eyes tracking 3 Centauri ships trying to form a defensive formation. "Weapons. I want precision shots on their communication arrays. Cut them off from each other." The Centauri had superior numbers when counting their support vessels, and their ships were larger with more raw firepower. But they were fighting like individuals trying to win personal glory rather than as a coordinated unit. The human fleet moved like a single organism with 12 bodies, each ship knowing exactly where the others would be and what they would do, anticipating movements and covering gaps with a precision that seemed impossible unless you understood how humanity trained its warriors. Lisa Patterson, still aboard the USS Valiant supporting the larger warships, analyzed the battle data streaming across her displays and confirmed what human strategists had theorized for decades. "The Centauri use overwhelming force doctrine," she reported to Greg, pulling up tactical analysis in real time. "They expect their superior size and firepower to win through attrition. They have no concept of precision warfare." Greg nodded, watching as his crew targeted specific systems on enemy ships rather than trying to destroy them outright, because humanity had learned long ago that disabled enemies were better than dead ones. "Target their engine cores," he ordered, bringing the Valiant around behind a Centauri destroyer that was too focused on the USS Defender to notice the smaller ship flanking it. "Make them dead in space." Not dead, in fact. The human ships executed maneuvers that pulled gravitational forces no other known species could survive, turns that would crush alien bodies under their own weight, accelerations that would liquefy organs not protected by humanity's advanced inertial dampening technology. A Centauri pilot tried to match the USS Guardian's barrel roll and passed out from the G-forces, his ship spinning out of control until its automated systems kicked in and stabilized it. But by then, 2 human vessels had already disabled its weapons and engine stacks. Now watch ship after ship on his fleet display turn from green to yellow to red as systems failed under the relentless precision of human weapons fire. And he finally understood what the ancient warnings had been trying to tell his people. These humans didn't fight like the Centauri had encountered. Before, they didn't rely on superior numbers or bigger guns. They fought with a level of skill and coordination that suggested they had been preparing for war since the day they first looked at the stars. "Get me a damage report," he demanded, already knowing it would be catastrophic. "All ships, sound off." The responses came in one by one, each worse than the last. Main weapons offline, shields failing, engines damaged, life support compromised. And through it all, the human fleet pressed their advantage without mercy, but also without unnecessary cruelty. They targeted weapons and engines, not life support. They disabled ships rather than destroying them. And that precision was somehow more terrifying than simple destruction would have been. Kevin Hayes opened the channel directly to Dexinal's flagship, and his voice carried the weight of someone who had won a battle that should have been close, but was instead completely one-sided. "Centauri Commander, your fleet is disabled," Kevin stated with no triumph in his tone, just simple fact. "You have one opportunity to surrender with honor. Your crews will be treated according to human standards of warfare, which means medical care and eventual return to your people." Dexinal's pride screamed at him to refuse to fight to the last ship, but he looked around his bridge at crew members who trusted him to make the right decision, and he knew that continuing would only result in their deaths. "How?" he asked, the word coming out broken and confused. How did one species from one world become this? The response came not from Kevin, but from Greg Morrison, whose smaller ship pulled alongside the damaged Dread Sovereign with weapons still trained, but not firing. "Commander, you asked the wrong question," Greg said, his voice carrying a mixture of sympathy and iron determination. "You should have asked why the warnings told you to stay away. The answer is simple. Earth is a death world." He paused, letting that sink in before continuing with words that would haunt Dexinal for the rest of his life. "Everything on our planet tried to kill us. The weather, the animals, the diseases, even the plants," Greg explained, painting a picture of a world so hostile it seemed impossible that intelligent life could have evolved there. "We didn't develop in peace like most species. We clawed our way up through competition and catastrophe." Lisa added her own knowledge to the explanation, her tactical mind understanding exactly what made humanity different. "Every advancement we made came from trying to survive something trying to kill us," she said, pulling up data on Earth's history. "Ice ages that should have ended us, extinction events that wiped out most other life, and wars against ourselves that taught us how to fight better than anyone else." Kevin Hayes' voice joined the conversation, adding the strategic perspective that commanders needed to understand. "The galactic community marked our region as restricted not to protect us, but to protect everyone else," he stated flatly. No pride in his voice, just truth. They knew that if humanity was threatened, we wouldn't just defend ourselves, we would win. Because that's what we've been doing since we first stood upright on a world that wanted us dead. Dexinal processed this information, and suddenly all the pieces fell into place. The impossible maneuvers that human pilots could survive. The precision weapons designed to disable rather than destroy. The coordination that seemed supernatural, but was actually just the result of a species that learned to work together or die. "You're not warriors," he said quietly, finally understanding. "You're survivors who learned that the best defense is overwhelming preparedness." Greg Morrison smiled grimly at that assessment, because it was probably the most accurate thing any alien had ever said about humanity. "We are both," he corrected. And now you understand why those warnings were written, not because we're aggressive or cruel, but because we're very good at what we do when we have to be. The battle was over in less than an hour from start to finish. And when the final Zentari ship powered down its weapons in surrender, the human fleet had suffered minimal damage while the alien armada floated dead in space. Disabled but intact Kevin Hayes began coordinating the rescue and recovery operations, sending medical teams to every Zentari vessel to treat the wounded and ensure life support systems remained functional. All human vessels begin humanitarian operations, he ordered. And his fleet shifted from combat mode to rescue mode with the same efficiency they had shown in battle. Treat their wounded as you would our own. Dexenol watched through his viewport as human boarding parties arrived on his flagship. And instead of conquerors or executioners, they came with medical supplies and engineering equipment. Dr. Ashley Morgan, Chief Medical Officer of the USS Defender, stepped onto the Dread Sovereign's bridge with a team of medics and immediately began triaging wounded Zentari with practiced efficiency. Commander Dexenol, I'm Dr. Morgan. She introduced herself while her team spread out to help injured crew members. We're here to help. Please direct us to your medical bay so we can treat the seriously wounded. 3 days after the battle, Dexenol sat in a human medical facility aboard the USS Defender. And the irony of his situation was not lost on him. He had come to conquer and instead found himself a prisoner being treated with better medical care than his own empire could provide. Dr. Ashley Morgan worked on his injured arm with technology that seemed almost magical compared to Zentari medicine, using devices that knitted broken bones and repaired torn tissue at the cellular level without any of the pain or scarring he would have experienced at home. This will take another few minutes, Ashley explained, her tone professional but not unkind. You fractured your radius and ulna when your ship took that hit to the bridge. The bone regenerator needs time to work properly. Dexenol watched in fascination as the device in her hands glowed softly and his arm stopped hurting for the first time in days. The bones literally growing back together under the influence of human medical science. How do you have such advanced medicine? He asked, genuinely confused because the human weapons had seemed brutal in their efficiency. You fight like warriors born for battle, but you heal like species dedicated to preserving life. Ashley smiled at that observation while checking the readings on her medical scanner. And her answer revealed something fundamental about humanity that Dexenol was only beginning to understand. We're good at both because we had to be, she said simply, adjusting the regenerator settings on Earth. You could be the best fighter in the world, but one infection could still kill you, so we learn to fight disease as hard as we fight enemies. She pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's medical history, and Dexenol saw a timeline of plagues and pandemics that would have destroyed most civilizations. Each one followed by bursts of medical innovation as humanity adapted and overcame. We lost billions of people to diseases over our history, Ashley continued, her voice carrying the weight of that tragedy. So we became very motivated to make sure it never happened again. Every human child learns about the great plagues and the people who fought to cure them. Dexenol looked around the medical bay and saw his crew, members receiving the same level of care. Centauri warriors who had tried to kill these humans now, being saved by them with technology and compassion that seemed to contradict everything he thought he knew about war. For Lieutenant Carl Jensen, a human security officer, stood guard near the medical bay entrance, but his posture was relaxed rather than threatening. And when a young Zentari soldier cried out in pain from a nearby bed, Carl immediately called for a medic rather than viewing it as a security concern. Your people show mercy to enemies, Dexenol observed, watching this interaction with growing confusion. This is not how the galaxy wages war. Ashley finished her work on his arm and stepped back. letting him test the range of motion, which was now perfect and pain-free. "We show mercy because we understand what it means to suffer," she replied, beginning to pack up her equipment. "Earth taught us that survival requires cooperation and compassion as much as it requires strength. Species that only know how to fight eventually destroy themselves." Over the next week, Dexenol was transferred between different human ships as repairs were made to the Zentari fleet. And each day he saw new aspects of humanity that challenged everything the Zentari Empire believed about power and civilization. He watched human engineers work alongside Centauri technicians to repair damaged ships, teaching the aliens about human technology while learning about Centauri systems in return. And the humans shared knowledge freely rather than hoarding it as strategic advantage. He ate in the mess hall of the USS Sentinel, where Captain Martin Cross insisted the Zentari prisoners eat the same food as the human crew. And Dexenol discovered that human cuisine was surprisingly good, despite being made from ingredients native to a death world. "Try the pasta," Martin suggested with genuine friendliness. "It's made from wheat, which is one of the grasses we domesticated about 10,000 years ago. Turned out to be pretty useful for feeding billions of people." Dexenol tentatively tried the dish and found it delicious, which somehow made the entire situation even more surreal. He was eating dinner with warriors who had defeated him completely, and they were treating him like a guest rather than a prisoner. "Why are you being kind to us?" he finally asked, setting down his fork and looking at Martin with genuine bewilderment. "We attacked you without provocation, ignored your warnings, and tried to conquer your space. By all rights, you should execute us or at minimum keep us in cells." Martin's expression grew serious as he considered how to answer that question. And when he spoke, his words carried the weight of humanity's complicated history, "Because we know what it's like to be on both sides of that equation," he said quietly, gesturing to the other humans in the mess hall who had paused to listen. "Our history is full of wars where we were both the attackers and the defenders. And we learned some hard lessons about what happens when you treat prisoners badly." He pulled up a holographic display showing images from Earth's past prisoner of war camps, war crime trials, peace treaties, and reconciliation ceremonies that followed brutal conflicts. "We learned that how you treat defeated enemies determines what kind of species you become," Martin continued, his voice carrying conviction born from painful historical lessons. "You can choose revenge and perpetuate cycles of violence, or you can choose mercy and maybe break those cycles." Dexenol spent hours in the ship's observation deck, staring at the blue and green planet that hung in the viewport like a jewel in the darkness. And he tried to reconcile what he was seeing with what he had been taught about primitive death worlds. Earth looked beautiful from space, with swirling white clouds and vast oceans that caught the light of its yellow sun. But he knew now that beneath that beauty lay a world that had forged humanity in fire, and Struggle Admiral Kevin Hayes found him there one evening, and the human commander stood silently beside him for several minutes before speaking. "It doesn't look dangerous from up here," Kevin observed, following Destino's gaze to the planet below. "That's part of what makes Earth so deceptive, beauty and danger all mixed together." Dexenol turned to face the Admiral, and all the questions that had been building inside him for days finally came pouring out. "Your people could have destroyed my fleet completely," he said, gesturing helplessly, as if trying to grasp something just beyond his understanding. "You had us at your mercy, but instead you saved us, healed us, even fed us your own food. I don't understand why." Kevin's expression was thoughtful as he considered the question. And when he answered, his words painted a picture of humanity that Dexenol would carry with him forever, because we're not defined by our capacity for violence, even though we're very good at it when necessary, Kevin explained, his hands clasped behind his back in a military stance that somehow conveyed both strength and restraint. "We're defined by our choices, and we choose to be better than our worst impulses. He turned to face Thexnell directly, and his eyes held the weight of someone who had seen war and chosen a different path. Every human child grows up learning about the mistakes of our past, the wars we fought over resources and ideology, the atrocities committed in the name of empire and conquest, Kevin continued, his voice carrying the lessons of history. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times over, and each time we pulled back from the brink. We swore to be better. Dexnell understood then that the warnings hadn't just been about humanity's combat capabilities. They had been about a species that had learned to balance incredible capacity for violence with equally incredible capacity for compassion. The galactic community was right to mark your region as restricted, he admitted quietly. But not for the reasons I thought. It wasn't to protect you from us. It was to protect us from learning this lesson the hard way. Kevin nodded in acknowledgement of that realization, and his next words carried both a warning and a hope. Your fleet will be repaired and sent home, he said formally, shifting into his role as representative of Earth's government. You'll carry a message back to your people, and you'll carry the memory of what happened here. Use both wisely. Thexnell watched as human and Zentari crews worked together in the repair base, and he saw his warriors laughing with their former enemies as they shared stories and learned about each other's cultures. Pride had brought him here expecting easy conquest, but reality had given him something far more valuable, understanding that true power wasn't just about the ability to destroy, but about the wisdom to know when not to. His arm, healed perfectly by Dr. Morgan, would never ache again, but his pride would carry scars from this defeat for the rest of his life. Scars that would hopefully remind him and his people that some warnings exist for very good reasons. And as he prepared for the journey home, Thexnell realized that the Zentari Empire had not just been defeated in battle. They had been taught a lesson about what civilization could be when it chose mercy over vengeance, cooperation over conquest, and wisdom over pride. 3 weeks after the battle, the repaired Zentari fleet prepared for departure from Earth's region, and Thexnell stood on the bridge of the Dread Sovereign, watching human engineering teams disconnect from his ship after completing repairs that had been done with remarkable speed and skill. Admiral Kevin Hayes appeared on the main view screen, and his expression carried the same measured calm that Thexnell had come to associate with humanity's approach to everything they did: deliberate, precise, and always purposeful. Commander Thexnell, your fleet is cleared for departure, Kevin announced formally. But then his tone shifted slightly to something more personal. You carry with you our official message to the Zentari Empire, along with complete records of everything that happened here. Thexnell nodded, his hand resting on a data storage device that contained not just the official message, but also detailed documentation of the battle. Medical records showing how humanity had treated Zentari wounded, and even personal testimonies from his crew about their time as prisoners. I will deliver your message to the Council, Thexnell replied, and the weight of that responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders. Though I suspect they will not want to hear what I have to say. Kevin's smile was understanding rather than mocking, because he knew exactly how difficult it would be for a proud warrior culture to accept the truth of their defeat. Sometimes the most important messages are the ones people don't want to hear, Kevin said. Then his expression turned serious. The message is simple. Commander, the warnings were real. They were not ancient superstition or primitive fear, and the restricted zone remains restricted. He paused, letting those words sink in, before continuing with the full weight of Earth's government behind him. We have treated your people with every courtesy and provided medical care that exceeded what you would have received in your own empire, Kevin stated. And Thexnell could not dispute this truth. We did this not because we are weak, but because we choose to be civilized even to those who show us no such courtesy. The Admiral's next words carried an edge of steel beneath the diplomatic language. And Dexenol understood that this was the real message. The warning that must be heeded. The next fleet that ignores our boundaries will not receive the same mercy, Kevin declared, his voice carrying absolute certainty. We have demonstrated our capability and our restraint. Do not test whether our patience has limits. The Xanthari fleet engaged their engines and began the long journey home. And Dexenol spent much of that journey preparing his report and dreading the reception it would receive back on Earth. Captain Greg Morrison stood in Admiral Sarah Kim's office receiving a commendation for his actions during first contact. But his mind was elsewhere, on the implications of what had happened and what it meant for humanity's future. You handled that situation perfectly, Sarah said, reviewing the official reports with satisfaction. You gave them every chance to withdraw peacefully, documented their aggression clearly, and bought time for the fleet to position itself. Greg accepted the praise, but his expression remained troubled. And Sarah recognized that look from her own experience with the burden of command. Something on your mind, Captain? She asked, setting aside the reports to give him her full attention. Admiral, we just proved to the galaxy that we can defeat a major military power, Greg said slowly, choosing his words carefully. But I keep thinking about what Elder Sarakil said in their council records, about how civilizations fall when they refuse to heed warnings. Sarah nodded in understanding, because she had been wrestling with similar thoughts since the battle ended. You're worried that our demonstration of strength might encourage others to test us rather than deterring them, she observed. And Greg's expression confirmed her guess. Or worse, he replied, pulling up a galactic map showing the positions of various alien empires. We might inspire an arms race as other species try to match our capabilities. Either way, we could be looking at a more dangerous galaxy rather than a safer one. This concern was shared by Ambassador Tyler Chun, who was preparing for humanity's first formal address to the galactic community in over 3 centuries. And the weight of that responsibility was evident in the careful way he reviewed his prepared speech. Tyler stood before a mirror in his quarters, practicing the words that would define humanity's relationship with the rest of the galaxy. And each phrase had been debated by teams of diplomats and strategists. The galactic community has been watching, he said to his reflection, testing the tone and cadence. They know what happened when the Xanthari ignored our warnings. Now we must make them understand what it means. His aide, Helen Porter, listened critically and made notes on a datapad before offering her assessment. The tone is good, firm, but not threatening, she observed, pulling up polling data from other human diplomatic channels. But you need to emphasize that we're not seeking to expand beyond our current borders. That's the fear we need to address directly. Tyler nodded and adjusted his speech, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether humanity remained isolated in peace or became entangled in galactic politics. Against their wishes on the Xanthari homeworld, the council chamber was silent as Dexenol finished his report, and the holographic displays showed footage of the battle that made several council members visibly uncomfortable. You're telling us, Ambassador Victor said slowly, his voice lacking all of its previous confidence, that 12 human ships disabled our entire battle fleet in less than an hour? Dexenol met his gaze directly. No longer the proud warrior who had departed, but someone who had learned humility through painful experience. I'm telling you that we were completely outmatched. From the moment we entered their space, he replied, gesturing to the tactical displays that showed the one-sided nature of the engagement. Their technology is not superior to ours in raw power, but their application of it is beyond anything we've encountered. He pulled up medical records showing Xanthari wounded who had been saved by human doctors. Engineering reports on repair techniques that exceeded Xanthari capabilities, and personal accounts from crew members who had been treated with dignity and respect. Despite being prisoners, they could have killed us all. Dexnal stated flatly, letting that truth settle over the council. Instead, they healed our wounded, repaired our ships, and sent us home with a message that we would be wise to heed. Sorakil spoke for the first time since the meeting began, and her voice carried no triumph at being proven right, only sadness at the cost of that vindication. "I tried to warn you," she said quietly, her aged eyes moving across the faces of council members who had voted to ignore her counsel. The ancient records were clear about what would happen if we provoked the humans. She activated a holographic display showing fragments of text from various extinct civilizations, all saying variations of the same thing. Avoid Earth's region. Respect human boundaries. Do not test their patience. Every species that encountered humanity and survived long enough to leave records said the same thing. Sorakil continued, her voice growing stronger. They are dangerous, not because they are cruel, but because they are competent at everything they choose to do, and they choose to be both warriors and healers, conquerors and preservers. Dexnal added his own testimony to hers, and his words carried the weight of personal experience that no one in the council could dismiss. The warnings were written to protect us, he said, meeting the eyes of each council member in turn. The humans restricted their own region, not because they feared us, but because they wanted to give other species space to develop without interference. He played the recorded message from Admiral Kevin Hayes, and the council listened in silence as the human commander laid out terms that were both generous and absolute. "We hope for peaceful cooperation with all species," Kevin's message stated, his image projected life-size above the council table. "But understand this clearly. Those boundaries are for your protection, not ours. We will defend our space against any aggression, and we will do so with the same efficiency you have witnessed." The message continued with an offer of diplomatic relations on humanity's terms, mutual respect, clear boundaries, and open communication, but also an implicit warning that any future violations would be met with immediate military response. Other slumped in his chair, all his earlier arrogance drained away by the reality of what had happened to the fleet he had helped send to its defeat. "What do we do now?" he asked, and for once his question was genuine rather than rhetorical. Sorakil stood, her aged frame straightening with purpose as she addressed the council with authority that came from being proven. "Absolutely right. We accept their terms. We establish diplomatic relations, and we spread word throughout the galaxy about what happens when you ignore warnings about Earth's region," she declared. And no one argued with her assessment. And perhaps most importantly, we learn from this experience. Far across the galaxy, Tyler Chun stood before the assembled representatives of the galactic community, and his speech was broadcast to countless worlds and species who had been watching humanity with new interest for thousands of years. "Humanity has remained within our designated region by choice," Tyler began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "We respected the old boundaries not because we were confined,